Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Edgevana Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Thiele, and I'm thrilled to announce that Stacey Shulman, VP of Healthcare, Life Sciences, and Emerging Technologies at Intel, has joined us today. Stacey, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thanks. Stacey, I'd love to hear, a little bit in your own words about, how you got to where you are, or maybe what's a day in a life? When you and I talked before about your responsibilities, I ran out of room on my notepad of all the areas you cover. So I'm sure the audience would be fascinated by the kind of work that you're expected to be responsible for at Intel.
Sure. Yeah, I have two distinct groups at Intel. One is, three distinct groups, really. One's healthcare, one's life sciences, labs and life sciences, and the other is this more horizontal group, which is emerging technologies. And what we're responsible for in that group is looking at, these emerging tech trends and how do we incubate them into the various consumer-facing verticals that we service at Intel. And so we look at, anything that's a buzzword for the most part. If it's a three-letter acronym that's trending, we're probably looking at it. AI, edge computing, anything around robotics, blockchain, metaverse, again, you name it, we're probably digging in and looking at what are the obstacles for that technology for a broader ecosystem. How do we as Intel help remove those obstacles? Most of the time we do things through open source, where we'll put our own resources into an open source community to build, the plumbing type stuff that's not the value add. We'll give that to an ecosystem to help accelerate their efforts in that space. And then we also look at things like policy, are there policy, areas that get in the way of that tech trending? Are there other things that just need to be addressed so that that technology can take off in the ecosystem? So that's what my team focuses on mostly.
That's awesome. I mean, and it reminds me of our conversation, which has been at least a month and a half ago now, sometime in early December or something, I can't remember, but at least a month ago. And I remember being fascinated by, and you use a slightly different term than I do, but it turns out to really mean the same thing. And its effect that a lot of your responsibility around these emerging technology groups is helping to lower the barrier to entry.
Yep.
Right. And I've probably overused that phrase in conversations. Not everyone accepts it as exciting as I do, but to me, almost every technology we've ever experienced, or maybe more appropriately, every technology solution ever created, could have been created 6 months earlier, 6 years earlier. It's just a matter of, could you have done it with the appropriate amount of complexity and cost?
Yeah.
And so it's when the right barriers to entry are lowered that it allows those markets to grow. And so I'm excited for you and this group in recognizing that sometimes the best way to make a market flourish is to figure out the right way to help all boats float at the same time. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's always, there's that plumbing that nobody wants to do. It's not value added. It's hard to justify for companies. When you look at AI as an example, you look at video to feed AI. Well, you've got to build video pipelines. You've got to do ingestion from a camera. Nobody makes money on that. What you make money on is the insight. And so instead of us working with 5,000 companies that are all, at the same time writing a video ingestion service, why don't we write a video ingestion service and open source it for the 5,000 companies so that they can start from a higher starting plane and get there faster, and reduce their development costs as well. So that's our goal. Those are the types of things we look for. They're not overly exciting for most people to talk about. Unless you're a developer, then it's very exciting to get a head start.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, we talked about a few different themes, and I don't know that we'll get through all three of these. I have a feeling that we could spend a lot of time, a whole half hour on any one of the three themes we mentioned between each other earlier. But let's go ahead and get started and see what kind of progress we can make. Intel has such a broad coverage, and I for those people who aren't involved in infrastructure on a daily basis or coding to a chipset on a daily basis, I think it's easy to forget how broadly involved in the ecosystem of technology that Intel is. And as a result, I have to assume that you get to see a lot of what customers are interested in relative to some of these trends that you talked about, and even trend areas that you and or your groups aren't specifically addressing. Can you talk a little bit about what Intel's seeing these days, especially as it relates to, edge?
Yeah, edge compute is one of my favorite topics because one, you either have the group that believes that it's a new topic, and or you've got the group who kind of shrug it off as though I've had a server in my, at the edge for a long time. And so I want to kind of maybe add some qualifiers on the way I see edge. I see edge in this trend of software-defined everything. As we started moving towards software-defined everything, this approach of having purpose-built hardware and purpose-built, fill in the blank silicon or whatever that is, even systems and solutions, is evolving. And that evolution is taking us into software-defined everything. And as we start looking at software-defined everything, now you have, software-defined networks meeting up with software-defined, servers and software-defined compute. And so where we had, groups that were all siloed in the past, you had your networking team, you had your server team, and even in companies like Intel, where we have our data center team and we have our IoT team and we've got our networking team. Well, we all had to start speaking a different language, which is, how do we create interoperable software layers that work together seamlessly? And how do we create an environment so that you can take any kind of workload, whether it's a networking workload, a non-networking workload, and put it wherever it is best placed for that use case, and be dynamic about it? And then how do you put in a layer of intelligence on top of that, so that you can then intelligently orchestrate those workloads to be where best placed? And so when I think about the intelligent edge, that's how I think about it. I think of it as a software-defined edge. There's hardware underneath it. We're Intel, that's our goal, is we want to sell more hardware. But we understand that the way to do that is to simplify the life at the edge and to make it software-defined. And so when we look at the trends, that's the bucket I would put it in. We call it a lot of different things in the industry, but ultimately we're struggling with, what we can talk to integration struggles or whatever else, but we're really struggling with that interconnectivity between all of those different historically disparate groups and siloed, solutions out there. And so that's the trend that I'm seeing. And I'm seeing a lot of the cloud service providers wake up to this now, finally, where they're starting to look at, okay, we want to expand to the edge. We want to expand our services to the edge, where historically their focus was, how do I get data from the edge into the data center or into the cloud? Now I'm seeing that change from, how do I bring the cloud to the edge? Which finally, that's where we want to see. That's the kind of motion that we need to see in this space. So that's, I'd say, on the edge topic, that's the major trend that I'm seeing is the CSPs start to really embrace with real solutions and looking at how do they make that easier. I'm also seeing CSPs embrace the reality that hybrid is here to stay. There's not going to be this scenario where it is one cloud and you put everything into a cloud. People are going to be multi-cloud and they're going to be hybrid. They're not going to move all of their solutions off premise and put them in the cloud. That's not, in my opinion, going to happen anytime in the near future. And so that we have to architect for that reality.
Yeah, no, and everything you're saying, although my data set is probably considerably smaller, everything you're saying jives with what I'm seeing as well. And I, although, part of, and I wouldn't even ask you to comment on this because it would be too dangerous probably for Intel to comment on, but
well, we'll see. Give me a shot.
Yeah, but I'm kind of optimistic that this intelligent edge that as you describe it, and I like that idea. I might even write something about, what I think of when I think of the intelligent edge. But my impression of the first moves by the CSPs was very much, well, we're just taking a rubber band of our cloud and we're trying to move it a little bit closer to you. Everything should be good. It'll still be expensive. You'll still be connected to us. It'll just be nearer to you. And now it seems like they're recognizing that that's not the answer, that they actually have to plan and design and incorporate all of the primary reasoning for edge in their design and deployment. So I'm seeing that transition slowly happen. But from an intelligent edge standpoint, I mean, that you mentioned, I think I'm saying the same thing that you did, and happy to have you tell me that I'm wrong, but I don't think I have articulated as well as you did, but I've always looked at it from the perspective that eventually we'll be using so much infrastructure distributed so broadly around the world that the luxury of building unique infrastructure, either in location or in fiber or in sets of servers or whatever, for every new opportunity or every new business will just be as unthinkable as somebody being a car maker deciding they need to build their own roads.
Yeah.
Right. And that this idea
each
that
of us thinking we need to build our own energy plant.
That's right. And so the idea that you'll be able to leverage existing infrastructure at the edge, even if it's servers that were originally built by Intel for Intel supply chain, or if they were a network originally built for connected cars, but you'll be able to use the resources that are available to you that are, in my parlance, best fit for your need at that moment or the time. And we'll use the intelligence of things like AI and policy and governance, et cetera, to help determine where data sits, whether or not it matches in latency requirements or CPU performance requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Does that sort of match what you're thinking, or am I taking it a little bit too far?
No, it matches. And I think that, if I were to add some, maybe the way I think about it from an operational technology, I think this is the trend, right? You've got most of the stuff that's moved to the cloud, I would put into the productivity and collaboration type workloads.
Yep.
And there was a lot of work to be done there, email, stuff like that. Moving all of that into the cloud makes a lot of sense, in storage and long-term storage. That I think is where a lot of people have been spending their time. As we start getting into operational technology, which is for the most part been untouched by the cloud. It's most of the data that sits in a distribution center or a manufacturing facility never makes it to the cloud, a high percentage of it. And that's just growing. I mean, as we generate more data, as we instrument more things, it's growing. And so the question I have is, one, I agree with this hypothesis that, will people be building out more infrastructure versus leveraging infrastructure that they have? I do think that there will be some of that, but I think it will be different. And I don't see big data centers, people investing in big data centers. I do see people investing in micro data centers, are moving more intelligence out to closer to where the operations are happening in their business. And so on the operational technology side, I do see more intelligence happening there. I do see more infrastructure needs there, but it has to be highly flexible. And I think that's the key. And if you have infrastructure where you can have something running in your factory or at the closest telephone pole, closest cell tower, dated myself on that one, but the closest cell tower, then, and you can move those, seamlessly, you can start leveraging different infrastructure that we didn't have access to before. And so I think that's something that I'm seeing happen.
That's awesome. I'm going to resist talking about why that aligns with my business model. I'm not supposed to be advertising myself too much on my own show. First of all, thanks for that. I think that was fascinating and a terrific answer to that question. And because I would like to try and touch on more of this, I'm going to go to our second theme for the day and ask, from and you can pick either from a broader Intel perspective, or from a Stacey Shulman perspective. What are you seeing in the market these days that gets you excited? For instance, is the trend of digital transformation supported by edge and better distribution models and better intelligence in AI and stuff, or is edge in and of itself, or is blockchain? What are one of those areas what have you most excited for kind of the growth and opportunity presented?
Yeah, I, I'm in a lot of things, so I'm excited about a lot of things. So let me talk about the macro trend that kind of touches a lot of these things, and that is that distribution. The distributed intelligence is probably the category I'd put it in. And it's not just about the compute. I'm seeing the work. So if you look at even, I'll come back to healthcare for a second. In the healthcare industry, one of the trends is moving healthcare out closer to the person, to the individual, as close as their own home. So you can get quality. The goal is to have quality healthcare delivered to your home and to help you, recover at home and to hospital at home. And so this whole move the hospital to the individual in healthcare, saying the same thing in retail, move the store to the individual. And we've seen that for a long time in e-commerce, but the fact that you can buy something online and have it in the immediacy of having it delivered within an hour or two, what that's created retailers to do is move their distribution centers out closer to the individual as well. So I'm seeing this trend of distributing intelligence out as far as possible, and that's why I'm excited about this fundamental kind of enabling technology that we'll call the intelligent edge. But the tech is fun, but I'm really excited about is how that improves our lives. As we have an aged population, being able to get quality care in their own home is incredibly important. It extends the amount of time they get to stay in their home. And, as a shopper, I love the fact that, I can get something delivered to me really conveniently. I maybe rely too much on delivery services now with COVID, but things like that, I think, we're seeing that in restaurants, we're seeing that in a lot of different industries. And so even in manufacturing, we're seeing, move the manufacturing, the final leg of the manufacturing closer to the buyer as well. And so those are the trends that I think are the ones that keep me thinking and keep me up at night thinking about how do we help accelerate those trends and how do we help enable them.
Yeah, I would personally love, because although I get some incoming information in regards to potentially healthcare focused solutions, and even as you and I talked about, as I said over a month ago, about the amount of data created by the average hospital, et cetera, on a daily basis. Talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, about some of the specifics you're seeing relative to solutions focused on healthcare, because I think, there are, don't get me wrong, I mean, what the Autonomy Institute is trying to do relative to 0 deaths in a city because of smart traffic management, smart care, that's incredibly important. But I think it would be ridiculous to assume that if there's a really important opportunity associated with the edge in healthcare, that everyone isn't a little bit interested in that. Yeah. From things as smart as, better interaction with the healthcare devices that you wear or carry with you, to being able to have the equivalent of a virtual doctor actually in the ambulance that's stuck with a flat tire, right? And helping the injured or heart attack victim that's still in the ambulance, right? What are some of the things that you're thinking and their associated importance?
So the healthcare industry has been historically and ridiculously behind in terms of digital transformation and leveraging technologies that already exist. And so when we look at, what needs to happen there, if I set that aside and look at the other problem in the medical industry is the inequity that's caused. So if you live in a city and you have access to companies like Mayo or Cleveland Clinic and, some of the bigger research hospitals, you get excellent care. But if you're out in the rural communities, you're still not getting great care. That's changed a little bit with telehealth, but there's still a lot of inequity. And even in the hospital systems, they see if they transfer a patient out of one of these tier 1 hospitals back into the rural community hospital, the degradation of that patient is crazy.
Right.
And it's real. And so when we look at kind of one of the areas in healthcare that I'm excited about, it is, being able to provide better care out into these areas that historically have been underserved. And so that's one of the things that I think telehealth is bringing. But when we look at companies like Medically Home, what they're finding is that they can actually service a community better without using a regional hospital. They can do it by taking the EMT services there, equip them better, give them better tools, let them go into the home and provide that kind of care with oversight of some of the world-class hospitals at places like Cleveland and Kaiser. They have a partnership as well, and some other hospitals too. And so, so that's one of the things that I think in the medical industry we're going to see more of is, closing that gap of healthcare equity in the rural communities in particular. So that's one of the areas that I'm really fascinated by.
Yeah, I mean, I love that notion and sort of the correlation to the democratization, for lack of a better word, of being able to hire technology folks.
Yeah.
Even if they want to live in Des Moines, Iowa, or outside of a national monument somewhere.
Right.
Right. And you can still hire them and have them be your top coder or your top engineer or salesperson, whatever the case may be. And that kind of flexibility in medical care has been non-existent, right? We've gone to either it's the best house call doctor you can find in your neighborhood, or it's going into the big city somewhere far away to find a large hospital system. But there's really nothing in between. And so I'm excited about this potential. I mean, not for the least of which is because I'm not as young as I'd like to be anymore. And at some point, my willingness to live anywhere will likely be impacted by, well, how old am I and how much healthcare am I expected to potentially need? And do I want to be an hour away from a good doctor or a good medical facility, right? And my brother and his wife live in Roundup, Montana. And there is nothing that you could call medical service in Roundup.
You got to get a helicopter and be taken somewhere.
Right. That's right. You got to get a helicopter to Billings, or drive yourself and risk it. And that's in a car in good weather. That's at least an hour. And so I think this is a fascinating area of opportunity. So Stacey, we're closely getting towards the end of our period of time, and I'd like to leave the last 4 or 5 minutes for you. Is there something that you're working on, or something that you've seen that really, for lack of a better description, spins your beanie every day, and you'd love to share with everyone?
Well, I like to look at kind of the trends in the market, that touch the market. And so I talked a little bit already about this distribution trend. The other one that I really like to think about is that I think touches a lot of industries is this notion of kind of two things. One is this polarized views of either hyper convenient, like medical in your home, or very experiential. And maybe we don't say experiential, but we'll say customized or bespoke. That I think when we look at even healthcare, you're gonna want one of those. You're either gonna want somebody highly specialized and really unique and customized and personalized care for yourself, or you're gonna want it really convenient. Retail, the same thing. I want a great experience when I go into a brick and mortar store. I want, magical experience, or I want it really convenient. I generally don't want anything in the middle anymore. And so that trend, I think, is we're starting to see, and it's starting to create conversations over this merge of technology and art, which I love that space where, technologists and artists and storytellers and entertainers come together and solve problems for humanity and people in a more elegant way. And so that's an area that I'm personally fascinated by, and I've been spending some time there. And I think that then starts touching on topics of the metaverse and how will that impact us? What does it mean for us? And what does it mean in the different industries that it could impact? So definitely starting to build a thesis around the metaverse and things like retail, and how that could disrupt e-commerce and social selling on e-commerce, social buying on e-commerce. And starting to think about what could better environments in hospitals even do for patient care. How does VR and metaverse help with pain management? And that's some things that we're seeing a lot of research done. So that's kind of the areas that I'm working on now and starting to build a thesis with people on my team.
That's awesome. And I'm, it's funny, I really had, because I've been so involved in thinking about Edge for the last 5 years, and I'm always keeping, staying at least ankle deep in data center and cloud and traditional infrastructure and things like that. But I've spent the last 5-6 years really focused on all things Edge. And I'm far behind where I should be on AI. I'm just beginning to get up to speed on blockchain. And so I just hadn't been paying attention to Metaverse, right? And I assumed I knew what it was, but I got some exposure, in fact, through a shared friend, Eric Thiele, with some technology that he's working on at Vadim. And the minute I got reintroduced, I just was overwhelmed with thoughts of shit, pardon my French, but shit, the solutions that this, even in my little simple mind, the solutions that this potentially represents for people that are working from anywhere, for education, for event management, for healthcare, for, as you called it, experiential, but experiential selling, right? I even thought about it. Well, imagine if somebody could walk literally, figuratively, depending on your perspective, I guess, walk through the Edgevana website and have one of our people show up and virtually design an answer to their question, in a metaverse type situation. So I'm really actually fascinated by the technology. And maybe one last question that'll come from my thinking here is, I see Web3 as sort of being a critical component of blockchain and metaverse, and all of them having some significant links. But I've also been privy to some concerns from people that Web3 potentially causes disadvantage for people that may be sight impaired or whatever. What are your thoughts on either those technologies, or whether in conjunction, or whether there are as many risks as there are rewards for something like Web3?
Yeah, I think that accessibility, in any category, needs to be thought of as we design out these solutions, and it's generally not thought of, as a top priority. And so I can see that concern being for Web3. We had the same issues when websites first were launched. It was the same exact issue, and then screen readers came about. And so I personally believe that it's solvable.
Yeah.
We have enough intelligence to be able to make that solvable. And the good thing is, when something's digitized, you know what it is. And so you can add an intelligence layer that's a lot easier. And then we've got a lot of great technology for, autonomous solutions today that, leverage cameras and can do a lot of really intelligent things on anything from reading people's emotions to, understanding kind of what movement they're making. And so I actually think that it's a valid concern, and it's something that we should look at. But technologically, I'm not concerned about solving this problem. I think the technology is there to solve this and to make it right. Now we just have to make sure that the prioritization of that solve is in the front and center for that ecosystem as we build it out.
So Stacey, this has been fantastic. I'm really thrilled that you agreed to join the program, and love hearing you talk. And I hope we can find a time to do this again in the not too distant future. Um, Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm full of opinions, love to share them. And so any chance I get to talk about the things I'm passionate about, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. So everyone, thank you again for listening in. Thanks to my guest. And if you're interested in being a guest, or if you have someone you'd like to suggest as a guest on the program, please feel free to email us. Again, thank you very much for listening and watching. Take care.